The screaming started in the docking bay and didn't stop until the gurney crashed through the medical wing doors. Ben Harris looked up from his supply inventory to see chaos pouring into the room. 6 security officers surrounded a smoking metal stretcher, their faces hidden behind full combat helmets. Whatever lay on that gurney was making the metal itself bubble and hiss. "Vraxian warrior, critical condition," the lead officer shouted. "We lost 2 dock workers just getting him off the ship. Their suits dissolved." The head doctor, a tall Peltharian with silver skin, took one look at the patient and stepped backward. "Get it to isolation chamber 3. Full hazard protocols. No direct contact." Ben moved closer, trying to see through the crowd. The warrior on the gurney was massive, easily 8 feet tall even lying down. Dark purple scales covered his body, but they were cracked and broken in dozens of places. Yellow fluid leaked from the wounds, eating through the metal beneath him like acid. The smell hit Ben's nose, sharp and chemical, making his eyes water. "Who's treating him?" Ben asked. The head doctor was already walking away. "No one, we can't. Look at him. His blood dissolves everything it touches. Our equipment would last maybe 30 seconds before breaking down. Our protective suits even less." "But he's dying," Ben said. "He was dying the moment whatever attacked him broke through his natural armor," the doctor replied. "We'll make him comfortable. That's all we can do." Ben watched as other medical staff backed away from the isolation chamber. Through the transparent wall, he could see the Vraxian warrior struggling to breathe. Each exhale released a small cloud of vapor that left scorch marks on the chamber ceiling. His eyes, bright yellow with vertical pupils, rolled desperately. A junior doctor from the Kelthian species approached the chamber, then stopped. "The protective gear won't work. I checked the specifications. Maximum exposure time is 45 seconds before complete breakdown. We'd need at least 3 minutes just to assess the injuries properly." "So we just watch him die?" someone asked. "We document it," the head doctor said quietly. "We learn what we can for next time. Maybe future medicine will find a solution." Ben felt something twist in his stomach. Future medicine, future patients. Not this one, not now. He looked at the warrior again. The alien's breathing was getting worse, more shallow. Yellow blood pooled beneath him, eating through the isolation chamber floor. 3 months ago, Ben had arrived at this station fresh from Earth's medical academy. He was 24 years old, bottom of the hierarchy, mainly doing inventory and basic first aid. The other species treated him politely but didn't expect much. Humans were new to the coalition, still proving themselves, still learning how things worked out here among the stars. Ben had spent most of those 3 months reading. The station's database was massive, filled with medical information on hundreds of species. He'd read files that other medics never bothered with because they were labeled theoretical or impossible to treat. The Vraxian physiology file had a warning label in red text across the top. "I'll do it," Ben said. The head doctor turned to look at him. "Excuse me." "I'll treat him, I volunteer." "You're not qualified. You're barely certified for basic trauma care." "And everyone who is qualified is refusing," Ben said. "So right now, I'm the most qualified person willing to try." A Kelthian nurse laughed nervously. "You'll die. The moment his blood touches you, you'll die. We've seen it happen. 2 dock workers, remember." Ben remembered. He also remembered something from his training on Earth. Humans had survived plagues that wiped out entire populations. They developed resistance to bacteria, viruses, and toxins that would kill most other creatures. Their immune systems were aggressive, almost violent in how they attacked foreign substances. It wasn't protection, not exactly, but it was something. "I'm human," Ben said simply. "We handle things differently." The head doctor studied him for a long moment. "If you die in there, it's on your record. I won't be held responsible." "Understood. You'll have maybe 5 minutes before your suit fails completely. less if you make direct contact with his blood. Then I better work fast. Ben moved to the equipment lockers and started pulling on protective gear. 3 layers of sealed suits, each one supposedly resistant to chemical burns. Supposedly. He added thick gloves designed for handling radioactive materials. They were clumsy and made his hands feel like clubs, but they might buy him extra seconds. Other humans on the station had started gathering outside the medical wing. Word spread fast in small communities. Rachel Lee from engineering pushed through the crowd. "What do you need?" "Tools that won't dissolve," Ben said. "Titanium, ceramic, anything that can handle extreme acid." "I'm on it." Rachel sprinted toward the engineering bay. David Ockhaffer from security approached. "I pulled the Vraxian anatomy files. Everything we have. It's not much, but I'm sending it to your helmet display." "Thanks." Ben sealed the final layer of his suit and approached the isolation chamber door. Through his helmet, he could see the Vraxian warrior watching him. Those yellow eyes were focused now, aware. The alien said something in his own language, words that the translator couldn't process. It sounded like a question. "I don't know if I can save you," Ben said honestly, "but I'm going to try." The chamber door hissed open. Heat washed over Ben immediately, and his suit's internal temperature started climbing. He stepped inside, and the door sealed behind him. The Vraxian's blood covered the floor, smoking and bubbling. Ben's boots left footprints in metal that was actively melting. "Okay," Ben muttered to himself. "Let's see what we're working with." He moved closer to the warrior, his heart hammering against his ribs. This was either the bravest or stupidest thing he'd ever done. Maybe both. The important thing was that someone had to try. Someone had to step forward when everyone else stepped back. Ben reached out with his gloved hands toward the first wound and began to work. The first touch told Ben everything he needed to know. The Vraxian scales felt like heated ceramic under his gloves, radiating warmth that made the temperature sensors in his suit scream warnings. Yellow blood oozed from a deep gash across the warrior's chest, and where it dripped onto Ben's glove, the material immediately started to smoke. 30 seconds of contact time remaining on right glove, his suit's computer announced calmly. Ben pulled his hand back and examined the wound. It was deep, possibly reaching internal organs. The edges were burned, suggesting energy weapons. He needed to stop the bleeding, but everything he touched would dissolve within moments. "Rachel, how's that equipment coming?" Ben spoke into his helmet communicator. 2 minutes. I'm fabricating ceramic surgical tools right now. They should resist the acid better." 2 minutes. The Vraxian didn't have 2 minutes. His breathing was shallow, rapid. His body was going into shock. Ben looked at the wound again and made a decision that would have gotten him expelled from any medical school on Earth. He grabbed the edges of the wound with both hands and pressed them together. His gloves began to disintegrate immediately. The acidic blood ate through the first layer, then the second. Ben felt heat building on his palms, then pain. Sharp, burning pain that made him want to let go and pull away. Instead, he pressed harder. "Warning, glove integrity at 15%. Recommend immediate evacuation." "Shut up," Ben told the computer. Through the observation window, he could see the medical staff watching in horror. The head doctor had both hands pressed against the glass, shouting something Ben couldn't hear through the sealed chamber. The Vraxian warrior made a sound, deep and rumbling. His yellow eyes focused on Ben's face. In that moment, despite the different species, despite the language barrier, Ben understood the look. It was surprise. Shock that someone was touching him, helping him, when every instinct should make them run away. "I've got you," Ben said, even though the warrior probably couldn't understand. "Just hold on." His gloves were gone now, completely dissolved. The yellow blood was touching his bare skin. It burned like nothing Ben had ever felt before, like holding his hands over an open flame. His skin turned red, then began to blister. But something strange was happening. The burning plateaued, stopped getting worse. His skin wasn't dissolving like the gloves had. Human biology, human immune response, whatever was in that blood that made it so toxic. Ben's body was fighting it, not winning but not instantly losing either. It was buying him time. Rachel burst through the chamber's equipment airlock, passing through 3 layers of sealed doors. She was carrying a box of freshly made tools, their surfaces still warm from the fabricator. These are ceramic composite. They should last longer. Good, I need something to seal this wound with. Working on it, Rachel looked at Ben's hands, saw his bare, burned skin pressed against the alien's chest. Oh my God, Ben. I'm fine, get me that sealant. She ran back through the airlock. Ben maintained pressure on the wound, feeling the Vraxian's blood pooling beneath his palms. The warrior's breathing was evening out slightly. The immediate bleeding was slowing. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. David's voice came through the communicator. Ben, I've been comparing Vraxian anatomy to Earth reptiles. Their internal structure is similar to large lizards. The organ you're holding closed is probably equivalent to a liver. If it's damaged, he needs fluid replacement immediately. What fluids? Ben asked. Anything we have will react with his blood chemistry. According to the files, Vraxians can process certain mineral compounds, silicate solutions. We might be able to synthesize something. Do it fast. Rachel returned with a tube of industrial sealant, the kind used to patch hull breaches in space. This is designed to bond in extreme conditions. It might work. Ben took the tube with bloody hands and examined it. The sealant was meant for metal, not flesh. But right now, the Vraxian's blood was more similar to industrial acid than anything biological. It might just work. He applied the sealant to the wound edges, holding them together with pressure. The material hissed and bubbled as it reacted with the blood, but it didn't dissolve. Instead, it hardened, creating a seal that held. The bleeding stopped. The Vraxian warrior took a deeper breath. His eyes cleared slightly. One down, Ben muttered. About 20 more to go. For the next 12 minutes, Ben worked faster than he'd ever worked in his life. He used ceramic tools to clear damaged tissue. He applied industrial sealant to wounds. He improvised bandages from heat-resistant fabric Rachel brought from engineering. His hands burned constantly, the pain a steady background he learned to ignore. David fed him information about Vraxian physiology. Rachel brought whatever materials he requested, no matter how strange. The rest of the station's human population gathered outside the chamber, watching through the observation window. They couldn't help directly, but their presence mattered. When David arrived with the synthesized fluid replacement, Ben didn't hesitate. He used a ceramic needle to create an injection point and push the fluid directly into the warrior's bloodstream. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the Vraxian's breathing strengthened. His scales, which had been dull and faded, regained some of their color. It's working, Rachel said. His vital signs are improving. Ben sat back on his heels, exhausted. His hands were a mess of burns and blisters, but they were his hands, still attached, still functional. The Vraxian warrior looked at him, those yellow eyes now clear and focused. The alien spoke, words in his own language. The translator finally caught up, processing the dialect. Why? Ben didn't need to ask what he meant. Because you needed help, that's reason enough. The warrior was silent for a moment. Then he said something else, a long phrase the translator struggled with. It finally displayed on Ben's helmet. You touched death to pull me back. This is not forgotten. Ben didn't fully understand what that meant in Vraxian culture, but he nodded anyway. Just rest now. You're going to be okay. He stood up, swaying slightly. The chamber door opened, and medical staff rushed in with proper equipment. They took over, stabilizing the patient with tools that could now safely handle him since the immediate crisis was past. Ben walked out of the chamber on shaky legs. His suit was destroyed, his hands were burned, and he felt like he might pass out. But the Vraxian warrior was alive. That was enough. Ben spent the next day in the medical wing, but this time as a patient. His hands were wrapped in regenerative bandages that looked like white cocoons. The burns were healing faster than the alien doctors expected, another quirk of human biology that surprised everyone. They'd given him something for the pain, but he refused anything that would make him drowsy. He wanted to stay alert, to monitor the Vraxian warrior's recovery. The warrior, whose name Ben learned was Kravik, was in a private recovery room now. His vital signs were stable. The industrial sealant had held against his acidic blood, though it looked strange against his purple scales. Every few hours, Ben would shuffle into the room to check on him, and every time, Kravik would be awake and watching the door as if waiting. "You should be resting," Ben said during one visit. Kravik's translator was working properly now. "I am resting, my body heals, but my mind has questions." "About what?" "About why a human, barely trained, would risk death for a stranger, for a Vraxian." Kravik shifted on the medical bed, his scales scraping against the reinforced frame. "Your people are new to the coalition. You owe us nothing. You knew I was dangerous." Ben sat down carefully in the chair beside the bed, mindful of his bandaged hands. "On Earth, we have a saying, 'First, do no harm.' It's an old medical principle. It means that when someone needs help, you help them. Species doesn't matter. Politics doesn't matter. You were dying and I could try to save you. That's all the reason I needed." This is common among humans. The helping part? Yeah, I'd say so. We're not perfect, but when things get bad, humans usually show up for each other, for anyone who needs it. Kravik was quiet for a long moment. "My people have a different way. We believe in blood debts. You saved my life by touching poison, by walking with death. In my culture, this creates a bond. I am now oath-bound to you until the debt is repaid." "You don't owe me anything," Ben said. "I was just doing my job." "You were doing more than your job. You were being human." Kravik's yellow eyes were steady. "I am beginning to understand why the Coalition accepted your people so quickly. You do not think like other species. You do not calculate risk and reward before acting." "Sometimes we do. We just sometimes decide the risk is worth it anyway." The conversation was interrupted by alarms blaring through the station. Ben's communicator buzzed urgently. Rachel's voice came through, tense and fast. "Ben, get to the docking bay. Now. There's a Vraxian patrol ship requesting emergency landing. They've got wounded aboard, multiple casualties." Ben stood up, his chair scraping back. "How many?" 12. They're asking for you specifically. They heard about Kravik." 12 wounded Vraxians. Ben looked down at his bandaged hands, then at Kravik. The warrior was already trying to sit up. "Do not go alone," Kravik said. "My people's injuries will be severe if they request help. You will need assistance. The medical staff won't help, you know that. Then ask your humans." 10 minutes later, Ben stood in the station's cargo bay, which had been hastily converted into an emergency treatment area. Rachel had gathered every human on the station who had steady hands and a strong stomach. There were 17 of them from various departments: engineers, security officers, administrative staff. None of them were trained medics except Ben, but all of them had volunteered without hesitation. "I'm not going to lie to you," Ben told them, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "This is dangerous. Vraxian blood is highly acidic. It will burn you. Your protective gear will fail. You might get seriously hurt." "But they'll die without help," said David. It wasn't a question. "Yes, they'll die." "Then we help." Rachel crossed her arms. "You're going to show us how, and we're going to keep these warriors alive. That's what humans do." The patrol ship landed with emergency thrusters screaming. When the cargo ramp lowered, Ben saw the extent of the damage. 12 Vraxian warriors in various states of injury. Some could walk with support. Others were unconscious on stretchers. All of them were leaking that dangerous yellow blood. Kravik had insisted on coming despite still recovering. He stood at the cargo bay entrance in borrowed armor and spoke to his fellow warriors in their own language. Ben couldn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. Reassurance. Trust. These humans will help you. Let them try. Ben organized the humans into teams of 2 or 3 per patient. He demonstrated quickly how to apply pressure to wounds, how to use the ceramic tools Rachel had mass-produced in the engineering bay, how to work fast but carefully. His instructions were simple, direct. No time for detailed medical lectures. The most important thing is don't panic when your protection fails, Ben said. Your skin will resist their blood better than the equipment. It will hurt, but you can survive it. Work through the pain. Focus on the patient. The humans spread out across the cargo bay, each team taking a wounded warrior. Ben moved between them, offering guidance, helping with the worst cases. He watched as a young human engineer named Peter held pressure on a Vraxian's severed leg, his face pale but determined as his gloves dissolved. He saw Rachel using industrial cable to create a tourniquet on another warrior, while David mixed more silicate fluid for blood replacement. It was organized chaos. There was no elegant procedure, no sterile protocol. It was battlefield medicine, adapted on the fly, performed by people who had no business doing it but were doing it anyway because someone had to. An hour in, one of the warriors began crashing. His breathing stopped, his heart's faltering. Ben sprinted across the bay, pushing through his exhaustion. He performed compressions on the warrior's massive chest, feeling ribs flex under his burned hands. 30 compressions, then Rachel administered oxygen through a modified mask. 30 more compressions. The warrior's body lurched, then his breathing restarted. His eyes opened, confused but alive. 4 hours later, all 12 warriors were stabilized. The cargo bay looked like a disaster zone, covered in burned equipment and bloodstains. The humans were exhausted, many of them nursing chemical burns. But everyone was alive. Every single patient had survived. Kravik approached Ben as the last warrior was moved to recovery. Your people have given us all life debt. This is unprecedented in our history. Ben looked around at the other humans, seeing their tired but satisfied faces. We just did what needed doing. No, Kravik said firmly. You did what only humans would do. The warning came 3 days later, just as the last of the wounded Vraxians were beginning to walk again. Ben was checking on Kravik's progress when the station's defensive systems activated. Red lights pulsed through the corridors, and a calm, automated voice announced incoming hostile vessels. Station Commander Telrix, a Peltharian with decades of military experience, appeared on every screen throughout the station. All personnel to defensive positions. This is not a drill. Unknown hostile forces are approaching. Medical staff, prepare for evacuation protocols. Ben looked at Kravik. The warrior's expression was grim. They found us. Who? The ones who attacked my patrol. They have been targeting coalition border stations for weeks, destroying supply lines, disrupting communications. Kravik pulled himself to his feet, testing his weight on legs that were still healing. They specifically target medical facilities. They want to cripple our ability to treat wounded, to break morale. That's a war crime. They do not care about your laws. Kravik moved toward the door. I must reach my warriors. We will defend this station. Ben followed him into the corridor, where chaos was already spreading. Alien medical staff were evacuating, following protocol. They were loading critical patients onto transport shuttles, preparing to retreat to safer locations. The head doctor was coordinating the evacuation, shouting orders to nurses and technicians. Ben found Rachel in the cargo bay, where the makeshift hospital was still set up. She was welding additional supports onto the medical beds, reinforcing them. David was there too, checking security barriers and weapon systems. The medical staff is evacuating, Ben said. I know, Rachel didn't look up from her welding. We're not. What? The wounded Vraxians can't be moved yet, not safely. And if this station falls, a lot of other people are going to get hurt, probably people we'll need to treat. Rachel finished the weld and looked at Ben. So we're staying, all of us. Ben looked around the cargo bay. Every human on the station was there, 17 people preparing defensive positions around the hospital area. They were setting up emergency power supplies, organizing medical equipment, creating fallback positions. None of them were soldiers, but all of them looked determined. This is insane, Ben said. Probably, David agreed. But you started this whole thing by walking into a chamber full of poison to save someone. We're just following your example. The Vraxian warriors, still injured but mobile, were gathering near the cargo bay entrance. Kravik stood at their center, speaking in his own language. When he finished, all 12 warriors took defensive positions around the hospital area. They weren't leaving either. The attack began suddenly. Hostile ships bypassed the station's outer defenses using some kind of jamming technology. Boarding pods slammed into the hull, cutting through metal with plasma torches. Alarms screamed as atmosphere leaked from breached sections. Ben heard weapons fire echoing through the corridors. Explosions rocked the station, making the cargo bay floor shake. Then the first casualties started arriving. Coalition security officers, burned and bleeding. Station personnel caught in the initial assault. Even some of the medical staff who'd been trying to evacuate had been caught in the attack. The humans went to work. Ben directed them, organizing the chaos into something resembling order. They treated burns, sealed wounds, stabilized trauma patients. The techniques they'd learned on the Vraxians worked on other species too. Adapt and improvise. Work fast. Don't stop moving. An explosion tore through a nearby corridor, and the cargo bay's main door buckled. Hostile forces were trying to breach directly into the hospital area. Kravik and his warriors met them at the entrance, their bodies forming a wall between the attackers and the wounded. The fight was brutal and close quarters. Vraxian warriors against armored soldiers in a narrow corridor. Ben worked on a wounded security officer while listening to the sounds of combat. Weapons fire, roaring, the crunch of metal and bone. He forced himself to focus on the patient in front of him to block out everything else. That was the job. That was what mattered. A hostile soldier broke through the Vraxian line, stumbling into the cargo bay with a weapon raised. David tackled him from the side and they crashed into a stack of supply crates. The soldier was stronger, trained for combat. David was a security officer used to breaking up arguments and checking credentials. But he fought anyway, giving Rachel time to hit the soldier with a heavy piece of equipment. The hostile went down and didn't get up. "Status," Ben shouted. "We're okay," David called back, breathing hard. "Keep working." More wounded arrived. Coalition forces were fighting throughout the station, trying to push back the attackers. The cargo bay became the center of the defensive line because that's where the hospital was. That's where people came when they were hurt, and the humans refused to abandon it. Peter was working on a Kelthian soldier when the power failed. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in red. The medical equipment switched to battery power, but some systems went down. Rachel started manually operating a ventilator for a critical patient, pumping the mechanism by hand to keep them breathing. "Coalition reinforcements are 10 minutes out," Commander Telrix's voice came through the speakers. "Hold your positions." 10 minutes. Ben looked around the cargo bay. 36 patients now, from a dozen different species. All of them depending on 17 humans who'd never trained for combat medicine, who'd learned trauma care 3 days ago from necessity. All of them holding on because these humans refused to give up. Kravik appeared in the cargo bay entrance, his armor scored with weapon burns. "They are retreating. The line holds." "How long until they try again?" Ben asked. "They will not. Their strategy has failed." Kravik looked around at the wounded being treated, at the humans still working despite exhaustion and injuries. They expected the medical facility to fall easily. They expected you to evacuate like sensible beings. Instead, you stayed and fought. You protected the fallen. They did not plan for humans. The hostile ships began withdrawing as coalition reinforcements arrived. The battle was over. The station had held. Ben sat down heavily on a supply crate, his legs finally giving out. Around him, the other humans were still working, still treating patients, still refusing to stop. They'd done it, against all logic and military doctrine. They'd held a hospital under direct assault. First, do no harm, Ben muttered to himself, even when harm is trying very hard to find you. The coalition medical inspectors arrived 2 days after the attack. They came expecting to find regulation violations, unauthorized procedures, and a death toll that would require formal investigation. Instead, they found 43 surviving patients, a functioning trauma center built in a cargo bay, and a group of exhausted humans who treated conditions most trained doctors wouldn't touch. The lead inspector was a Tyrellian named Voss, with 4 arms and a reputation for strict adherence to medical protocols. He walked through the cargo bay hospital with a data tablet, recording violations, improper sterilization, unauthorized medical personnel, unregistered equipment modifications, use of industrial materials in surgical procedures. The list grew longer with each observation. Ben stood in his rumpled uniform, his hands still bandaged from the original Kravik treatment, and watched the inspector work. He was too tired to be worried about consequences. The patients were alive. That was all that mattered. "This is completely unacceptable," Voss said finally, his voice tight with controlled anger. "The number of protocol violations here is staggering. You use civilians to perform complex medical procedures. You employed industrial sealants as surgical adhesive. You treated patients with toxicity levels that should have required full quarantine facilities." "Yes, sir," Ben said simply. "Do you understand the liability issues, the safety regulations you've ignored, the legal ramifications of unqualified personnel practicing medicine? I understand that 43 beings are alive who would have died following proper protocols." Voss's expression hardened. "That's not how medicine works. We have protocols for a reason. They protect patients and practitioners. They ensure quality of care. They also assume you have time, resources, and ideal conditions," Ben said. "We had none of those. We had wounded people dying and no one else willing to help them. Because helping them was too dangerous. The risk assessment was clear. The risk assessment didn't account for humans." Another inspector, a Peltharian named Kesra, spoke up. "I've been reviewing the medical outcomes. The survival rate here is 97%. That's statistically impossible given the severity of injuries and the conditions under which treatment was administered." "Impossible by what standard?" Ben asked. "By every medical standard in coalition history." Kesra's silver skin shimmered with confusion. "We've never seen sustained care under direct combat conditions. Medical facilities evacuate when threatened. That's basic military doctrine." "Earth medical doctrine is different," David said, stepping forward. He'd been standing with the other humans at the back of the cargo bay. "We have a concept called combat medics. Medical personnel who work in active war zones, who stay with wounded soldiers under fire. It's not new for us. It's tradition." Voss stared at him. "That's barbaric. You risk medical personnel in combat." "We risk everyone in combat when necessary, including medics, because treating the wounded saves lives and saving lives wins battles." David gestured to the hospital area. "Every patient here survived because we stayed. If we'd evacuated, how many would be dead?" Kesra consulted her data tablet. "Based on standard mortality projections for these injury types without immediate intervention, I calculate 78% would have died. 33 fatalities. The cargo bay was silent. The number hung in the air like smoke. Kravik had been watching from the doorway. He walked forward now, still moving carefully on heeling legs. Inspector Voss, I am Kravik, Special Operations Commander, Vraxian Defense Force. I speak for all Vraxian warriors on this station. We owe these humans life debt. Under our law, this is sacred. If your coalition punishes them for saving us, you will answer to the Vraxian High Command. This isn't about punishment, Voss said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. It's about proper procedure. Your proper procedure would have let me die, Kravik said bluntly. It would have let all of my warriors die. The humans ignored your procedure and gave us life. This is not a failing. This is wisdom your coalition lacks. More beings started entering the cargo bay. Patients who'd been treated during the attack. Coalition security forces who'd been stabilized while defending the station. They came quietly, standing behind Kravik, showing support without words. Commander Telrix appeared at the entrance. Inspectors, I believe there's something you should see. She activated a holographic display showing footage from the attack. It played out in silent horror, hostile forces breaching the station, targeting the medical wing, the evacuation transports being destroyed during launch. Then it showed the cargo bay defense. Humans working frantically while battle raged around them. Vraxian warriors forming a protective line. Wounded patients being saved, while others fought to protect them. Standard procedure was to evacuate, Telrix said. The humans refused. They stayed with the wounded, and that decision saved this station. When hostile forces realized the medical facility wouldn't fall, their entire strategy collapsed. They retreated. We held because these 17 humans decided that protecting the injured was more important than protecting themselves. Voss watched the footage, his expression unreadable. This still doesn't address the medical violations. Then change the regulations, Ben said. Everyone turned to look at him. Your protocols are designed for ideal conditions, for species that calculate risk before acting, for medical staff that prioritizes their own safety. But that's not universal. Humans approach medicine differently. We focus on the patient first, everything else second. We adapt to conditions instead of waiting for perfect conditions. We take risks when the alternative is certain death. You're suggesting we rewrite coalition medical doctrine based on one incident. I'm suggesting that maybe your doctrine has blind spots. Maybe there's value in the human approach, even if it looks reckless to you. Ben gestured to the patients standing in the cargo bay. Ask them if they think what we did was wrong. Kesra was studying her data tablet again. The Coalition Medical Command has been receiving requests from multiple member species. They want human medical personnel assigned to their facilities. Specifically, they want combat-trained humans who can work in hostile environments. She looked up. The demand is substantial. Voss was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he spoke. This requires review at the highest levels. The medical command will need to make a formal determination about these methods. But, Ben prompted. But unofficially, I recommend they approve a human medical corps program. What you've done here is revolutionary, even if it violates every safety standard I've ever studied. Voss almost smiled. Medicine is about saving lives. You've certainly done that. Ben felt tension he didn't know he'd been carrying release from his shoulders. Around him, the other humans were quietly celebrating. They'd done more than save lives. They'd changed something fundamental about how the coalition viewed medicine. 6 months after the attack, Ben stood in the same cargo bay that had served as an emergency hospital. It looked different now. The coalition had officially converted it into a permanent trauma center, complete with proper equipment, advanced life support systems, and chemical-resistant materials designed specifically for treating dangerous species. They'd named it Forward Station Medical 1, but everyone called it the Step, short for stepping forward when others step back. Ben wasn't junior staff anymore. Coalition Medical Command had given him the rank of Senior Trauma Specialist, and put him in charge of training new personnel. He still wore his plain uniform with its simple rank insignia, but now other beings listened when he spoke. More importantly, they volunteered to learn from him. The training room was full today. 36 students from 14 different species, all wanting to learn human combat medicine techniques. Ben recognized some of them as former skeptics, medical staff who'd evacuated during the attack and then watched footage of what the humans had accomplished. The first principle, Ben began, addressing the class, is that the patient comes first. Not protocols, not safety regulations, not your own comfort. When someone is dying in front of you, you make a choice. Help or walk away. We're here to train you to help. A Kelthian student raised one of her 4 hands. But the risk calculations don't change. Treating dangerous patients is still dangerous. True, but humans learned something a long time ago. Sometimes the right choice is the dangerous one. Ben activated a holographic display showing human medical history, plague doctors during epidemics, battlefield surgeons during wars, emergency responders during disasters. We've been doing this for thousands of years, working in the worst conditions with inadequate equipment while under threat. It's not optimal, but it's necessary. Another student, a Tyrellian, spoke up. Your biology gives you advantages. You resist toxins better than most species. You heal faster. You can work through pain that would incapacitate others. How do we learn methods that depend on being human? You don't try to be human, Ben said. You learn to think like humans, to adapt instead of following rigid procedures, to see problems as challenges instead of impossibilities. Your biology is different, so you'll develop different techniques. That's good. We want diversity in approach. Rachel entered the training room, carrying a box of equipment. She'd been promoted too, now heading the medical engineering division. She'd spent months designing tools that worked across multiple biological types, creating solutions that didn't depend on human physical advantages. The key insight, Rachel told the class, is that humans don't see barriers the same way. When other species looked at Vraxian blood and saw impossible to treat, humans saw we need different tools. That mindset shift is what you're really learning here. The door opened again, and Kravik walked in. The Vraxian warrior had fully recovered and was back on active duty, but he visited the station regularly. Behind him came his entire unit, 12 warriors who'd been dying in the same cargo bay 6 months ago. They were now assigned as permanent security for Forward Station Medical 1, protecting the place that had saved their lives. We've come for the ceremony, Kravik announced. Ben had almost forgotten. Today was the official dedication, the moment when Coalition Medical Command formally acknowledged the new approach to trauma medicine. The ceremony was being broadcast across Coalition space, watched by billions of beings. They moved to the main assembly area, where dignitaries from dozens of species had gathered. Commander Telrix was there, promoted to admiral after successfully defending the station. The Vraxian High Command had sent representatives. Even some of the original medical staff who'd evacuated had returned, looking uncomfortable but present. The ceremony itself was simple. Admiral Telrix spoke about courage under fire. The Vraxian ambassador spoke about life debt and honor. A representative from Coalition Medical Command officially approved the Human Combat Medicine Initiative, a new training program that would spread to stations throughout the territory. Then they called Ben forward. He walked to the center of the assembly area, feeling self-conscious about all the attention. They presented him with a medical citation, the Coalition's highest honor for emergency care. But that wasn't what mattered to Ben. What mattered was what the Medical Command representative said next. Effective immediately, Coalition medical doctrine is updated to include emergency field protocols based on human methodology. Medical personnel are authorized to make judgment calls in crisis situations, prioritizing patient survival over procedural compliance. This represents the first major revision to Coalition medical standards in 70 years. The assembly erupted in applause. Ben looked at the other humans in attendance, his original team of 17 who'd volunteered to help treat the wounded. They were smiling, some of them wiping away tears. They changed something fundamental about how the galaxy approached medicine. After the ceremony, Ben returned to the trauma center. There was always work to do. A ship had arrived with a patient suffering from radiation poisoning, a condition that was challenging but treatable. Two of his new students were handling it under supervision, using techniques they'd learned in training. They were nervous but competent, working through the problem methodically. Ben watched them work and felt something close to pride. This was the real victory, not the ceremony or the recognition, but the fact that more people were learning to step forward instead of stepping back. Kravik found him there, watching the students. "You are quiet during your moment of triumph." "I'm just thinking about how this started. With one emergency and one decision. I didn't know it would lead to all this." "That is the nature of human action," Kravik said. "You do not calculate the full consequences before choosing. You see what needs doing and do it. Other species plan for years before implementing change. Humans implement change and plan afterward." Is that a compliment or a criticism? It is an observation. Kravik's yellow eyes were thoughtful, and perhaps an explanation for why your species will become important to the coalition. You move at the speed of need, not the speed of bureaucracy. An alarm sounded. Another emergency incoming. Multiple casualties from a mining accident. The students looked uncertain, but they moved toward their stations. Ben grabbed his equipment and headed for the trauma bay. Kravik and his warriors took defensive positions automatically, ready to protect the medical facility if needed. This was the new normal. Humans teaching other species that medicine didn't stop for danger, that patients deserved care regardless of risk, that sometimes the most important moment in medicine was when someone stepped forward and said, "I'll try." Ben entered the trauma bay as the first patient arrived. He was ready. They all were, because that's what the human medical corps did. They showed up when everyone else said it was impossible. They stepped forward when all others refused. And they kept stepping forward every single time.